The first-class cabin froze in stunned silence, all because one woman didn't look the part. Dressed in a simple yet elegant dress, Sofia Mendez didn't match the diamond-draped passengers or the high-fashion travelers boarding Stellar Airways that day. She stepped forward with quiet confidence, holding a first-class ticket in her hand, ready to enjoy a flight her husband had insisted she take alone, as a reward for her hard work organizing a record-breaking charity event. But the moment she handed over her ticket, the atmosphere shifted. The head flight attendant, tall and polished with a tone as cold as the champagne being served, blocked her way. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. This section is for first-class passengers only." Her voice was laced with judgment, her eyes scanning Sofia's modest attire with obvious doubt. Around her, wealthy passengers peered over newspapers and cocktails, some smirking, others whispering. One man even chuckled, "Happens all the time." Economy class is getting a little too bold these days. Sofia remained calm, a flicker of discomfort passing through her eyes, but she didn't back down. "My husband purchased this seat for me," she said, her voice steady, the watch on her wrist catching the light, a quiet reminder of who she was and who had given it to her. But no one on that plane, not even the crew, had any idea who her husband really was. What they saw was a simple woman who, in their minds, didn't belong. What they didn't know was that within minutes, everything was about to change. Because walking through that very door, at that exact moment, was Eduardo Vasquez, Sofia's husband and the billionaire owner of the entire airline. And with just a few measured steps down that aisle, the entire power dynamic in the cabin would flip upside down. Sofia Mendez stood quietly at the gate, adjusting the elegant watch on her wrist, a gift from her husband, Eduardo. She was 35, graceful, composed, and dressed in a simple yet refined outfit that spoke more of self-respect than wealth. She didn't wear designer labels or flashy accessories. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity, the kind that didn't need to be announced. As she stepped into the aircraft, the atmosphere changed. The first-class cabin of Stellar Airways radiated luxury. Plush leather seats stretched out in comfort. The soft clinking of crystal glasses filled the air as champagne was poured into flutes. The flight attendants were perfectly polished, uniforms crisp and smiles rehearsed. Designer handbags sat tucked beside gleaming shoes, and conversations floated like music, low, smooth, full of names and destinations most people would only ever dream of. And then there was Sofia, alone, understated, and in the eyes of those around her, out of place. Her presence disrupted the unspoken rhythm of the cabin. Some passengers glanced up from their tablets and newspapers, their gazes lingering just a second too long. There was no hostility, just subtle, calculated curiosity. Who is she? Why is she here? But Sofia wasn't intimidated. Her husband had insisted she enjoy this flight alone, as a small celebration for the charity event she had recently organized, a project that had raised more money than any before it. "You deserve all the luxury in the world," he had said, kissing her forehead before leaving for an urgent meeting. She hadn't asked for first class. She had never needed extravagance. But today, she had allowed herself to accept it. Just this once. What she didn't know was that the very thing she had spent years avoiding, being judged for what she wore instead of who she was waiting for her the moment she stepped into that cabin. And those watching her now had no idea that this woman, quietly holding her boarding pass, was about to become the center of a lesson they'd never forget. Just as Sofia stepped into the aisle, ready to find her seat, a tall figure moved in front of her. Camila Reynolds, the head flight attendant, stood with perfect posture and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her navy uniform was flawless, gold stripes shining like badges of authority. Her voice, however, was anything but warm. "Ma'am," she said crisply, "I believe there's been a mistake. This section is reserved for first-class passengers only." Sofia blinked, caught off guard. She looked down at the boarding pass in her hand and gently offered it forward. "I have a first-class ticket," she replied, calm but firm. Camila took the ticket with the tips of her fingers, as though touching it might soil her manicured nails. She tilted her head and examined it for a little too long, eyebrows lifting ever so slightly in doubt. It's just unexpected, she muttered, clearly unconvinced. Her tone was wrapped in condescension, her expression one of forced politeness. Maybe the system placed you here by mistake. Around them, the cabin began to stir. A man in a gray suit lowered his financial newspaper, glancing at Sophia over the rim of his glasses. His gold cufflinks caught the light as he leaned back with a smirk. Happens all the time, he said loudly enough for others to hear. Economy must be getting a little too ambitious these days. Laughter rippled softly through the rows. A couple dressed in matching designer clothes exchanged whispers and sideways glances. The judgment wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. It sat heavy in the air, carried on subtle chuckles and polite mockery. Camila smiled again, this time with fake concern. Let me check if there's a seat for you in the back. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable there. Her voice lingered on the word comfortable, the meaning behind it painfully clear. Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks. Not because she was ashamed, but because she had been here before. Judged by her appearance. Dismissed before a word had even been spoken. But this time was different. She had every right to be there. And no one, no matter how polished or superior they appeared, was going to strip that right away. Sophia stood her ground, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye on her. My husband purchased this seat for me, she said calmly. Camila raised an eyebrow, her skepticism barely hidden. Your husband? She repeated, as though the idea was laughable. Before Sophia could respond, a soft, mocking chuckle came from a few seats away. A woman dressed in diamonds that sparkled like ice turned her head and smiled, not kindly. Next you'll say he's a CEO, she murmured, just loud enough to draw more attention. Her voice dripped with condescension, and others chuckled in quiet agreement. Sophia didn't flinch. She didn't lash out. Instead, she gently rested her fingers on the watch around her wrist. The cool metal grounded her. It was more than jewelry. It was a memory, a reminder. The day Eduardo gave it to her was the day their lives first intertwined. Back then, she had been standing in the aisle of another plane, not as a passenger, but as a flight attendant, and she had been proud of it. She had worked hard, climbed ranks, and earned respect through professionalism, skill, and unwavering poise. She remembered late-night flights, comforting nervous passengers, catching the smallest details others missed. She had loved her job. She had built a career based on integrity, not appearances. Now, standing in this luxury cabin as passengers questioned her worth, she realized something deeper. This wasn't about a ticket or a seat. It was about dignity. She had faced prejudice before, but never from the very world she once called home. Still, she refused to be shaken. Her past, her strength, and the quiet power that had always defined her, they were still with her. Let them laugh. Let them doubt. The truth was far stronger than their whispers. Just when Sophia thought the embarrassment couldn't go any further, another uniformed figure appeared. The cabin manager. His expression was firm, professional, but clearly uninterested in hearing her side. Ma'am, he said, voice clipped and businesslike, we're having a problem with your reservation. I'm going to have to ask you to step off the aircraft while we sort this out. There it was, the final blow, an attempt to remove her entirely, as if she were a problem to be dealt with, not a passenger with a paid first-class ticket. The cabin around her had grown quiet, but the judgment still pulsed through the air like static. Whispers, stares, a few suppressed smiles. Everyone watching, waiting to see if she'd be escorted out in shame. Sophia didn't move. Her posture was calm, but unshakable. She met the manager's eyes and said with quiet resolve, "My ticket is valid. I have every right to be here." The manager hesitated, caught off guard by her confidence. But before he could respond, Camila stepped in again, her tone sharper than before, her patience clearly thinning. "We understand, ma'am," she said, the words laced with false politeness. "But we can't have just anyone sitting in first class without proper verification. Just anyone." The phrase landed like a slap. It wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about worth. About being seen as less important, less deserving, less human, because she didn't look the part. because she didn't wear the labels, because her grace didn't come with a price tag. But Sophia stayed rooted in place, not out of pride, but principle. She had faced storms in her life. This was just another. And this time, she wouldn't be the one to walk away. The cabin door opened with a soft but deliberate click, the kind of sound that didn't usually draw attention. But something about the shift in air, the subtle change in atmosphere, made people glance up. And when they did, everything stopped. There he was, Eduardo Vasquez, 6'2", broad-shouldered, and dressed in a navy Tom Ford suit tailored to perfection. Silver threads at his temples framed a strong jawline and dark, neatly trimmed hair. He didn't need to announce who he was. His presence did it for him. The way he walked down the aisle, unhurried and calm, made it clear. This was a man who didn't just belong in first class. He owned it. His steel blue eyes scanned the cabin, taking in every detail with sharp precision. They moved from the curious passengers to the nervous flight crew, and finally, they landed on her. Sophia. He paused. His expression was unreadable, but those who knew him would have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, a subtle signal of controlled fury. Then, in a voice that was deep, calm, and carried through the entire cabin without being raised, he spoke one simple word. Sophia. She turned, surprised, eyes meeting his. He took another step forward, eyes still on her. Is there a problem? In that instant, the entire energy of the cabin shifted. The once confident crew stood frozen. The judgmental passengers suddenly fell silent. And the woman they had dismissed moments ago had just become the center of everything. No one could have predicted what was coming next. But one thing was certain, everything was about to change. Camila's confident smile vanished the moment Eduardo said Sophia's name. Her posture stiffened, and the color drained from her face. The cabin manager, who had just moments ago tried to usher Sophia off the plane, now stood motionless, his professional mask beginning to crack. "Sir," the manager began, his voice suddenly softer, more uncertain, "we were just resolving a small seating confusion." But Eduardo wasn't listening to excuses. He continued walking down the aisle, slow and purposeful, with the unshakable confidence of someone who didn't just fly first class. He signed the paychecks of those who served it. With every step, the weight of his presence pressed heavier into the room. Passengers shrank back slightly in their seats, unsure of what they were witnessing, but knowing instinctively that something big was unfolding. He stopped beside Sophia, placing a gentle hand on the small of her back, a silent but clear gesture of protection and possession. His voice was still calm, but the authority beneath it was unmistakable. "That's my wife's seat," he said, eyes now fixed on Camila and the manager. "Correct." Camila opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The man who moments ago was just another passenger had become someone far more powerful than any of them imagined. And suddenly, the question wasn't about a seating mistake. It was about how far they'd gone in misjudging the wrong woman. Eduardo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm tone carried more weight than any shouting ever could. "Yes," he said, turning fully to face the stunned crew. "Sophia Mendez Vasquez, my wife." A ripple moved through the cabin like a silent wave. The same passengers who had scoffed and whispered now sat up straighter, their expressions shifting from amusement to disbelief. A few looked away entirely, suddenly fascinated by the safety card in front of them. Eduardo's gaze never wavered as he continued. "Before we were married, Sophia was the youngest head flight attendant in the history of Stellar Airways." He paused, letting the words sink in. She dedicated years to this airline. She once noticed symptoms in a passenger before even he realized something was wrong. Her quick thinking saved his life midair. There's a plaque in the main office that still honors her for that moment. His tone carried a note of pride, but there was steel beneath it. Then his eyes, sharp and unforgiving, turned back to Camila and the manager. "So tell me," his voice quieted, even more dangerous for it, "is this how you verify whether someone belongs in first class? By their clothes? By how they look?" Silence fell. Not just quiet, but absolute breathless silence. No one moved. No one dared. The judgment that had hung so heavily over Sophia only moments ago now shifted direction, and it was clear those who had misjudged her were about to face a reckoning. Camila's face turned ghostly pale, the blood draining so quickly it looked as though she might faint. Her once confident posture sagged slightly as she tried to steady herself, one hand gripping the back of a nearby seat. The manager beside her shifted nervously, his collar suddenly too tight, a thin line of sweat forming along his temple. Eduardo hadn't raised his voice, but the tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. His calm was more intimidating than any outburst could have been. It was the calm of someone who had power and knew exactly how to use it. "I've just sent an email to the board," he said, pulling out his phone and typing with quiet precision. "Effective immediately, all Stellar Airways employees will undergo new anti-discrimination training." The announcement fell like a thunderclap in the silent cabin. He looked directly at Camila, his eyes cold and unwavering. "Miss Reynolds," he said, "you'll be the first participant." Camila couldn't speak. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. Her authority, her arrogance, everything she had displayed just minutes ago gone. In its place stood someone completely undone by the consequences of her own actions. And Eduardo? He didn't gloat. He didn't humiliate. He simply let the weight of accountability speak for itself. There was no shouting, no public scolding, just a quiet, decisive shift of power. And everyone in that cabin knew they had just witnessed it. As the cabin began to settle and the staff hurried to resume service, Eduardo turned to Sophia, his hand still resting gently at the small of her back. His voice softened, no longer carrying the edge of confrontation, but something more personal, more intimate. "There's something I hadn't planned to reveal just yet," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet warmth. "But I think now is the right time." Sophia looked at him, puzzled. "I've been working with the board on a new position," he continued. "Director of Customer Experience. It's a role that will oversee how our passengers are treated, from the moment they book a ticket to the moment they leave the plane. I wanted someone who understands people, who knows the industry, and who leads with both heart and excellence." Sophia blinked, surprised. "You created that position?" He nodded. "It was meant to be your anniversary gift. I wanted to present it to you in a more romantic setting, maybe over dinner at the resort. But after what happened today, I realized this moment chose itself." The offer hung in the air, unexpected and powerful. He hadn't created the role out of pity or because of what had just occurred. He had seen her value long before this flight ever took off. To him, she had always been capable of more, and now she had the opportunity to lead with purpose, from experience, and with a voice that could reshape everything. Sophia didn't speak right away. Her eyes shimmered, not from hurt, but from something deeper. Gratitude, recognition, the quiet joy of being truly seen. And in that moment, something beautiful rose from the humiliation she had endured. This wasn't just justice. It was a new beginning. Sophia sat quietly in her seat as the cabin settled around her, the buzz of whispers slowly fading into silence. Camila now moved through the aisle with a new posture, no longer commanding, but deferential, careful, almost invisible. Yet Sophia barely noticed. Her thoughts were elsewhere. She looked down at the watch on her wrist, the same one she had touched for strength just moments earlier. Now it meant something more. It was a reminder, not just of Eduardo's love, but of everything she had built for herself long before anyone knew her as Mrs. Vasquez. She thought back to her early days, fresh out of training, wearing her first flight attendant uniform with pride. She had memorized every safety protocol, learned to read passengers' moods in seconds, and mastered the delicate art of helping strangers feel at home 30,000 feet in the air. Her job had never been glamorous, but it had mattered, because people mattered. Later, after stepping away from the airline, she had thrown herself into charity work. She had built community programs from the ground up, raised money for children who had no one else, and earned the respect of leaders who had once dismissed her, not because of her name or her husband, but because of her own dedication. And now, Here she was being offered a leadership role in the very airline where she once served coffee and comforted crying babies. Sophia took a deep breath, not out of hesitation, but out of realization. She didn't need Eduardo's name to feel worthy, but his belief in her had reminded her of something she had long buried under humility and fear: her potential. She wasn't just the wife of a billionaire. She was a woman who had walked the aisle both in uniform and now, as someone invited to lead from the top. Not by chance, not by accident, but because she had earned it. For the first time in a long while, Sophia allowed herself to feel it fully. She was ready. The soft sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the ocean in gold and amber. On the private balcony of their beachfront suite, Sophia and Eduardo sat side by side, a quiet stillness between them that spoke louder than words. A glass of wine rested in Sophia's hand, untouched. The events of the day still lingered in her mind, not with pain, but with clarity. Eduardo turned to her, his expression gentle, his voice low. "I didn't fall in love with Mrs. Vasquez," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I fell in love with Sofia Mendez, the woman who served strangers with kindness, who carried herself with dignity long before she had my name. That's who I married." Sophia looked out at the water, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day. For so long, she had tried to separate her identity from Eduardo's world. She had wanted to prove herself without relying on his influence. But in doing so, she had almost forgotten the strength she carried all along. Now, everything felt different, not because others finally saw her, but because she finally allowed herself to be seen. She turned back to him, a soft smile curving her lips. "I think," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty, "it's time for a new chapter." As the sun slipped below the horizon, its final rays dancing across the surface of her watch, Sophia felt something lift from her shoulders. It wasn't just an end to a long day. It was the beginning of something new, something entirely her own. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked? Has anyone ever judged you before even hearing your story? It's something that happens more often than we realize. In airports, in boardrooms, even in everyday conversations, people are labeled, dismissed, or overlooked simply because they don't fit someone else's idea of who they should be. But what if we pause for a moment before rushing to judgment? What if we chose curiosity over assumptions and respect over appearances? Sophia's story is more than just a dramatic moment on a plane. It's a reminder that true worth isn't measured by labels or luxury, but by integrity, resilience, and heart. So the next time you meet someone new, ask yourself, do I really know who they are? Or am I just seeing what's on the surface? Let's do better. Let's treat every person we meet with the dignity and respect they deserve, no matter what they're wearing, where they come from, or what seat they're in. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Also, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Until next time, remember, the heart sees far more than the eyes ever will.